Sometimes during a legislative hearing, a committee will examine the particulars of a bill at issue, including the quality of its drafting, the need for additional provisions, or whether it can be improved or tweaked to make it more acceptable to the bill's opponents. However, with respect to H.R. 10, the Regulations from Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act, or REINS Act, I do not see the point of engaging in such a process because such a bill is simply an ill-conceived notion. And particularly because the regulations, the title, Regulations from the Executive in Need of Scrutiny, implies directly that the executive is in need of scrutiny. That executive, of course, is the President of the United States, not the President of the Democratic Party, but the President of the United States, Barack Obama. This act was not needed when George Bush was President, apparently. He did not need scrutiny, although in retrospect, with the nation coming close to falling into the Great Depression, the second Great Depression we'd have had, he needed a lot of scrutiny, putting us into a war where we didn't have weapons of mass destruction and squandering $1 trillion of our wealth and 4,500 of people's lives and a whole lot of our reputation around the world. He didn't need scrutiny. Only when this man, this great man, becomes president is there a need for, let me see the title of this again, executive scrutiny. I think that's what it was. Executive in Need of Scrutiny Act. Well, in itself, I think you can see that it's a political and not a governmental decision. In reviewing the written statements of the two majority witnesses, it's clear the real purpose here is to attack at its foundation the administrative system, particularly this president. In fact, both witnesses seem to take a strong issue with much of the 20th century. In fact, they antecede the president, but certainly his policies embody much of the great policies of the last half of the 20th century, which are under attack in this Congress, as modern government is. Under H.R. 10, all major rules, that is, rules that have a positive or negative economic effect of $100 million or more, there are increased prices for consumers, industries, and government entities, or have a significant adverse economic impact, must be approved by Congress before they can take effect. Congress must do so by passing a joint resolution of approval through both chambers under expedited process. I do not believe the REINS Act is necessary for the exercise of congressional control over the administrative system. Congress already has a number of means at its disposal to shape agency rulemaking. The most straightforward, of course, is its power to determine the nature and scope of its delegation of authority to an agency. If Congress deems that the delegation of authority was too broad, it's always free to revisit that delegation and, if needed, retract or narrow the scope of the agency's authority, always keeping in mind that we have three separate and equal branches of government, and that should be reminded to us as well as we read the Constitution in the first week, and it talked about the three separate branches, Article 1 and 2, etc. Additionally, as was demonstrated vividly just a few weeks ago, Congress can use its power of the purse to stop implementation of specific regulations it objects to. For instance, no fewer than 19 out of the 67 amendments to H.R. 1, the full-year Continuing Appropriations Act 2011, or the attack on the last half of the 20th century, were aimed at defunding the promulgation or implementation of existing and proposed regulations. Congress can also conduct oversight, whether through formal hearings or through less formal interactions between agencies and individual members or committees. Among the first phone calls that small business people and other constituents make when they have concerns about agency action is their members of Congress, which in turn prompt members to act. Finally, Congress has enacted statutes that shape the administrative rulemaking process, including the Administrative Procedure Act and the Regulatory Flexibility Act. Moreover, through the reporting requirements of the Congressional Review Act, Congress is kept informed about agency rulemaking activity. Congress is not shy about objecting to rules it finds objectionable and has the means to impose its will regarding such matters. Moreover, each of these mechanisms ensures democratic accountability over agency rulemaking. The REINS Act, however, would force Congress to pass judgment on major rules without the opportunity to make a well-informed decision about their merits, leaving the door wide open for special interests to stifle such rules in Congress. Under the bill, Congress has only 70 legislative days to pass a joint resolution of approval through both chambers and is limited to a total of 2 hours of debate in each House. Only 1 hour for each of those in favor and 1 for those opposed to the joint resolution. Certainly not enough time for a well-informed and intellectual debate of the issues. Committees of jurisdiction will only have 15 legislative or session days to consider the merits of major rules under their jurisdiction, after which a joint resolution of approval is automatically discharged. Under such a short-circuited process, is Congress really in a position to second-guess the merits of rules that in many cases took years of vetting to produce? Instead, members would be bombarded with visits, phone calls, and talking points from industry lobbyists who would no doubt take advantage of the short-circuit process to shape members' rules about the perspectives about the rule. The REINS Act forces Congress to move too quickly while pointlessly slowing down the agency rulemaking process in a way that is not improvement. The REINS Act also threatens to undermine Congress's ability to consider other legislative business. For example, in calendar year 2010 alone, there were 94 major rules, while there were only approximately 116 legislative days in the House during the same time period. And we're having less time on the floor now that we've had a change in the 112th Congress on how we meet. Even under expedited procedures, Congress will be forced to ignore other important business, doing a further disservice to the American people. This is not the first time the idea of requiring congressional approval has been proposed. It's been considered and rejected in the past. Chief Justice John Roberts criticized such legislation that was similar to the REINS Act in 1983. In a memorandum, he objected that such legislation would, quote, hobble agency rulemaking by requiring affirmative congressional assent to all major rules, unquote, and would, quote, seem to impose excessive burdens on the regulatory agencies, unquote. We ought not let the political passions of the moment produce such a radical change in how our government has worked and worked well for more than 100 years, recognizing the three separate and equal branches of government. The REINS Act is troubling for many reasons beyond the obvious political reins that it tries to project, and I urge my colleagues to oppose it. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman.